Hello and welcome to M&A Murders and Accusations, the good, the bad, and the ugly of selling your business. We dig into what you need to know and how not to kill the sale of your business. Now here's our host, Rick J. Krebs, Mergers and Acquisitions Advisor.
Hello and welcome to M&A Murders and Accusations, the good, the bad, and the ugly of selling your business. So I'm excited about this today. We're going to take a little different spin on things. And what we're going to do is I'm the co-founder and chapter president of the Utah chapter of Exit Planners. That's through the Exit Planning Institute, a national organization that's all about exit planning. And we had a meeting recently. We do these twice a year where we invite 3 business owners who recently sold their business to come and sit on a panel, and we ask them questions. It's not scripted. It's a meeting where we just bring them up in front of everyone and we let the attendees ask them questions. It's a great way for business owners and financial advisors and business owner advisors to learn firsthand, what is it like to sell a business? Many business owners have never been there before. They don't know how to sell a business. They're in uncharted territory and they feel a little out of, they feel like they're in over their head. They're not that comfortable with where they're at, but they need to do something. So anyway, we have these panelists. There's 3 of them. And it's interesting because these 3 panelists represent 3 different tiers of business sales. So the first one is the smallest tier. Howard sold a business and it was under $2 million. And then we have Chris Badger. He was involved in the sale of a business and it was $80 million. And then we have Don, who was in the middle, right? So you have 3 different tiers, 3 different perspectives. And I love the questions, and we're gonna circle up at the end and talk about the takeaways from the questions. But we opened it up; the audience gets to ask questions. We had a virtual event, so we had people attending virtually, and we had a question or two from them as well. So I hope you enjoy this. I think this is an extremely valuable episode for those business owners who are considering a sale and want to hear firsthand what it's like from someone who sold their business. Thank you. And enjoy. I'm going to apologize ahead of time for the audio quality. It's not the best. It's a little bit hard in a room where you have a microphone and everything, but the content is good. Thank you and enjoy. All right. I want to welcome everyone to the Utah chapter of Exit Planning, Utah chapter of Exit Planners meeting. And we're excited today to have our panelists. And what I would like to do is we'd like to start and have each panelist take 5 to 7 minutes and tell about their exit. And I've asked them each to share 1 or 2 takeaways from their exit, what they feel like you need to know, because we're going to open up to Q&A here soon. And you're going to ask things, but there's things that they want to tell you that you may not ask. And so I asked them to go through that first, okay? So we're going to start with Howard. Tell us a little bit about your company and what you did and how it went.
Okay. Should I use that mic?
You don't need to use the mic. You've got the mics here and they're working, the lapel mics. Go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Howard Flores. I was born and raised in Honduras. I came to Utah in 2015. Didn't speak any English, so I moved here to go to school to learn the language. Grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad was a business owner for about 22 years before he decided to move here, and then he sold his company and everything. So when I moved here, I was going to school, and one of my cousins, he was working in countertops. So didn't know what it was. He told me, hey, there's an opening. You want to come work for us? And I said, yes. So I joined the company doing countertops, and my family used to do windows and doors. So kind of the same pattern, doing sales, fabrication, installation. So kind of the same pattern. So I liked that. And just 2 years after, I decided to open my own company. It wasn't as easy as it sounds because I didn't know about the laws, about the culture and many things that you gotta know to be able to be in business. So it was a learning curve. It was a lot of stress in the beginning because there were a lot of things that I couldn't control. But I spent a lot of time studying law, studying taxes and all those good things that you gotta know to be a good business owner. So didn't work in the beginning. So we went and just did general construction for a couple of years. But in 2020, you wouldn't think about opening a company or growing in 2020. But we got an opportunity and we decided to open up our own shop and do the whole process ourselves. We hire sales guys, we hire a place, we rented a place to do the fabrication, we hire some guys to do the installation. So we were managing the whole process. So 2020, even though it was crazy and it was hard for many people, it was a great year for us. We made a decision, okay, if we are gonna die, we're gonna die out there fighting. So we went outside and we fought. And it was hard in the beginning, but it was an incredible year. In 21, we doubled sales, 22, we tripled sales. So it was a great journey. So countertops is basically the business that we did. Anything else? I'm missing something.
Tell us about your sale.
So about the sale process. So I met Art Warsaw. You might know him. So I met him in 2021, and we had an interesting conversation because I got in my door a letter saying, "Hey, if you're interested about selling your business, give me a call." It was totally random. It was very different and very unique. So I was very curious. So I told my assistant, "Hey, give him a call, set up a meeting, and let's just chat about it." So he came to our shop, and we just had a really good conversation about the business and about the selling process. And I wasn't thinking about selling at that time, but I was just curious about everything. So the business was doing so good, and I was always in touch with him. And in 23, I decided, hey, let's just sell and move on. Let's do something else because we're great at this, but we are also great at other things. So I gave him a call. We set up a meeting and we did the process. We went into the market and we sold within 8 months. And it's been 15, 14 months since we sold the business. And the transaction was easy. It might be hard to understand how easy it was just because Transworld was the one who helped with the transaction. So they manage everything. They manage the contracts, they manage the buyers, they screen those buyers, they manage the offers and everything. So I was spending minimum time at the sale. They were managing everything, which it was great for me because I was busy selling and managing the company. So my experience selling that company, it was great. And one of the thing is, I was just surprised because I thought I was just a guy with a business that was providing for my family and for other families, but it was greater than I honestly thought because we had so many people interested in this business. And when I was talking to Art, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, but who's going to be interested in this? Just 3 years ago, we were selling just a couple $1,000s a month. Now we're selling a couple millions, but who's going to be interested in a business like this? And I was just shocked by finding out that there were plenty of people, a couple dozen of people that were interested in that business. So that got me thinking about other markets because there is always a buyer for everything.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Chris.
Hi, my name's Chris Badger. So I tell people to start out that I'm a recovering CPA, but my license is still active in Denver. So I do outsourced CFO work, outsourced controller accounting work. And I'm going to talk about one of my clients that we helped through their sale just prior to COVID. And so I want everybody to kind of focus on two takeaways with this sale, which was about $80 million worth. So one is systems, and the other is tax compliance, which this week being April 15th, hopefully everybody's filed their taxes and everybody is tax compliant. So let me tell you a little bit about this company. Again, I was brought in to help them. They were a very fast-growing e-commerce company, and they'd been around for about 10 years at that point in time. And so they had some systems in place. And what system did they have in place? What does everybody see every day? QuickBooks, yes. So QuickBooks was their ERP system, which wasn't very good. And when you're scaling a business going from about $20 million a year to $80 million a year, QuickBooks just doesn't work as good. And it also, when people come in and are looking at due diligence, because we spent about 6 months in due diligence with Ernst & Young, EY, across the table, going through everything. And EY discounted every report that we ran out of QuickBooks. And at the end of the day, even though that company had saved money by having QuickBooks instead of NetSuite, so about a year before I started, they had made the decision to stay with QuickBooks, and they had an order management system on top of it, but they didn't want to spend the $100,000 on a NetSuite implementation. So during that sale process, it was about an $80 million sale. The EY guys said, we discounted everything 10% for having QuickBooks. And so who can do 10% on an $80 million sale?
$8 million.
I would have paid for that implementation over and over and over again.
$8 million.
So I always tell companies, if they're growing and if you want to sell in the future and you want to sell to private equity group, or if you want to sell to a larger strategic company, QuickBooks is not the system you should be in. You should be in a good mid-level system. So think NetSuite, think Microsoft Dynamics, the Business Central, a good mid-level software system. So again, first takeaway, make sure you got good systems in place, because that's going to add value in that transaction, okay? And QuickBooks is cheap, but it doesn't add any value in a transaction, okay? So recommend to your clients, people you're working with, step up into the real world, step up, put on your big boy pants, put on your big girl dress and pants, and move up to a system that's going to be adding value in a transaction. And it'll be adding value in just managing the company. So systems. The second piece was tax compliance. Because guess what one of their big issue was as an e-commerce company? Sales tax. Oh my gosh, right? And they were paying sales tax in Utah every month. And then they weren't paying sales tax anywhere else. And you know what? That's an easy thing to find out. And all of a sudden, you have a $2 million reserve against your sales price. That's money. Think of an $80 million sale, $2 million reserve for sales tax, because they hadn't implemented a good sales tax compliance program. Okay, and they were looking at having to go settle with a lot of states like California, because during that process, I found out that they had click-through nexus. Does anybody know what click-through nexus is? So, state of California, where, guess what? That's where all of our influencers were on Instagram that was promoting our products. And everything that clicked through those influencers had nexus in the state of California, and they wanted their share. And so as part of that sales process, we had to settle with a couple of states. We had to put a $2 million reserve against the sales price to cover future liabilities. And it was a huge stumbling block. Like I said, we did 6 months of due diligence, and I think 2 months of it was just on the sales tax issues. Okay? Wow. So when you're talking with clients, make sure they got good systems and tax compliance. So make sure the federal income taxes are all done and filed on time. Make sure your sales taxes. Payroll, that's true. How many people have 1099s versus employees? In the state of Utah, if you're audited, guess what? There's no such thing as a 1099. They're all employees if they're doing work for you. They're directed by you or for you. They're going to say it's an employee. So be very careful with 1099s. Anyway, those two issues had a huge impact on that cell. But the rest of their accounting was pretty clean. And when you have clean accounting, you can get through due diligence and you can see that sales price. And so I would highly recommend you make sure you've got good systems for your clients, and they're always tax compliant. So anyway, those are my two things for today.
Thank you, Chris. So before we turn over to Don, I want to just give a little color to that sales tax issue. So when you have these companies and they're getting ready to sell and they have not paid sales tax, this is always the big question. Do you go poke the bear and confess that you haven't paid sales tax in the state of California? Or do you just let it go? Right?
Fire your CPA immediately.
Well, yeah, fire your CPA or whoever it was. Get it fixed. There's so many of these questions because sales tax is something like I live in Heber City, a little town up over the hill, and we have like 6 different sales tax levels in the city of Heber alone. And so sales tax cannot just be a state issue, it's a county issue, it's a city issue, it's local, and there's different rates, and you can just jump into this can of worms and cause yourself a lot of problems. So I've dealt with that personally, and that is a huge issue with these. Thank you, Chris. So now I want to turn this over to Don. Don has had multiple exits, and I was involved with one of his, a smaller one, and we're going to let Don tell us about his exits.
Thank you, Rick. Well, I'll try to cheer everybody up after that story. Again, my name is Don Mealy, and I guess the main company I would want to talk to you about today would be my first company, which I ended up selling in 2004, and I know that's a long time ago. The lessons I learned in that process, selling to a good-sized private equity group, stayed with me through other transactions, other businesses that I started up, and I hope that there's some good pearls of wisdom that I can pass along in terms of that transaction. So, my company was the largest private contractor to district attorneys in the nation. We ran what were called misdemeanor diversion programs, which took a lot of resources away from overburdened deputy district attorneys that were dealing with a high volume of misdemeanor cases. To make a long story short, we offered a program through the district attorney's office. We provided all the operations and administrative detail to allow mostly first-time misdemeanor offenders to go through both a counseling program and you might say a victim restitution program as an alternative to criminal prosecution. How in the world did I come up with this idea? Well, I have to say I borrowed it from a gentleman who had hired me in Texas. I was living in Texas at the time. He was the guy who came up with the idea of traffic school. If you remember that, it's probably not a thing, hasn't been a thing for 20 years, but back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s, almost anybody who got a traffic ticket was offered traffic school. And this was the guy who came up with that. And he was a neighbor. He recruited me away from a corporate job I had, and he kind of taught me the ropes. And then 5 months later, he sold the company, as it turns out, to a couple of really well-educated guys that didn't know business. And it took me only a few weeks to figure that out post-transaction. But I hung in there for almost another year and then decided, you know what, rather than working for these gentlemen, I'm going to go leave Texas, go to California and start my own operation and compete with them. And that's what I did. And as it turned out, they were pretty easy to compete with. I grew my business probably in a decade to close to 100 times the size of their company when I worked for them. And so back in the early 2000s, I realized how complex this business was. We managed on any given day 1 million active misdemeanor cases. And so if we made one mistake, that meant somebody either went to jail who shouldn't, or somebody didn't go to jail who should. And the complexity of that, managing it across most of the largest jurisdictions in the United States, including Los Angeles, New York City, Chicago, Houston, Boston, you name it. It just became very, very complex. And I knew that I was way outside of my skill level. So I decided to sell. And fortunately for me, I had a mentor who was 30 years my senior, but a very experienced deal guy, Wall Street deal guy who had done, him and his business partner had bought and sold more than 40 companies in their heyday. And some of them were billion-dollar revenue companies, and he did really, really well. So I was very fortunate to have him as a mentor. And one of the great takeaways, I totally understand your focus on finance and accounting, because that was a weakness for us. And he quickly pointed that out to us too. Get rid of the Quicken, get rid of the QuickBooks and so forth, and which we did. We listened to him, and that was good advice. So that's, but we really learned through him, what do these buyers want when they buy a business? What are the top 4 or 5 things that you should be aware of, even before you've made the decision to sell? What do you have to have incorporated as part of your overall business strategy that's going to make a difference on that, on that exciting day when you get a great offer? And for me, it starts with number one, optimization. We had by the time my business was 17 years old when I sold it, and it was pretty mature. It was well run. We had lots of professional managers involved, but it still needed optimization. In virtually every system had to be reviewed. And by the way, our overall process took about 1.5 years, about 18 months. But we ended up with 15 letters of intent from some of the biggest private equity groups in the country, and learned a lot through each interaction with them. But optimization of systems, and certainly accounting. The next thing was optimization of the business model, so it was apparently robust, so that it could withstand changes in market conditions. And we had a business where we were effectively a monopoly. And why in the world would you ever want to sell a monopoly? And it was because, for me, I just thought the complexity and the potential liability risk for mistakes was going up and up and up. I started the business in the 80s when everybody had IBM mainframes. And when I sold, we had remote terminals virtually in every DA's office that we were under contract with. They had 24-hour-a-day access to all of our databases. They shared our specific, their county-specific data with others. It became super complex. And again, I knew I was not up to the task of really scaling this much, much larger. So the other thing that I was coached very carefully about was people, and making sure that you've got the right people to help grow the company that next level. And that meant for me changing some people that had been on, with the company for years. I had to move them either to one side and promote somebody else, or bring in somebody new. And that is painful, and it can be quite challenging. The next thing is you've got to have a seamless transition for any buyer in terms of the upper management. And that's where we spent a lot of time. I brought in, I was a member for many years here in Utah, the Utah Young Presidents Organization. I don't know if you're familiar with YPO, but I ended up hiring another YPOer to take over my business and run it through the transition. And that proved to be really valuable. It added to the overall multiplier effect that I was paid. So in the end, I have a lot more, if you want to come up to me later and ask about, any specifics about that transaction. But on a smaller scale, I was able to apply a lot of these principles I learned on the bigger deal to some of the smaller ones after that. And it really comes down to, optimizing the system of the business, making sure that the finances are robust, and just avoid the amateur mistake, I guess, of over projecting. I don't know what else to call it. The sophisticated buyers are going to see through that in seconds. You'd be shocked. But anyway, anything else I could cover?
That sounds good. Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And again, any questions, happy to answer for you. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Don and Kristen Howard. Appreciate that. Okay, questions? Yes.
This is a question for all three of you.
Hold
How do
on.
you deal with, okay, yeah, this is a question for all of you. How did you deal with equity for employees and management? ESOPs, phantom stock options? I'm just curious what you did there.
Great question. What I did is I set aside a part of the transaction to pay bonuses mostly. I guess I was greedy. I kept all the equity with my top managers and everything. But in terms of key employees and even some downline employees and all like that, we created a pool that rewarded them post-transaction. They got nice bonuses that year. And in many cases, they also got nice raises and changes in position. So.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of different ways you take care of your employees or senior management. With that specific transaction, before the LOI was signed, we went back and we created a pool and a plan where they actually had units within the S Corp. And it put all of the senior management, got $1 million plus. It was a pretty nice payout, but it was a bear to put in place because we had to hurry up and do it because we knew the LOI was coming. And there was also with an S Corp, what comes with an S Corp? Tax implications, right?
Yeah.
And I found out very quickly there's different sophistication levels with individual taxation. And a lot of the senior management understood. There's a lot of people that we had to coach and talk through and work with, and then set them up with an outside CPA because I felt like I was kind of the company guy, right? Doing that. But that was the best thing because when that waterfall came, senior management was very happy. Like they all walked out the door and got $1 million plus. I had to walk out the door and had to go look for a new gig. With those type of things, think of it with that transaction. What helped us get through that 6 months of due diligence was that senior management. And so it was rewarding the people that were helping us get to that transaction.
Did they get taxed on a short-term income basis for that stock since it was so close to the closing of the transaction day?
So we had to go back. We had some tax implications for that year that we had to put in place for that short period year. And then we did tax distributions out to cover the tax. And then they also got treated because we had put in place capital gain treatment versus ordinary income.
So for us, it was very easy because the people that was involved in management was my own family. So they all got, what they wanted. My parents wanted a house, so we put a down payment and all the closing costs for the house that they wanted. And my sister got the money to pay for school. She's graduating next semester in UVU in accounting. So yeah, it was fairly easy for that.
Good major.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Other questions? Yes. Go ahead. Hold on.
A lot of times when it comes to buying a company, you talk about creating a buy box, essentially, a criteria for what you want to see pricing or feasible in the company before buying it. Did any of you or your client have a sell box? Any criteria that you had in place for what you wanted, either out of the sale or what kind of buyer you wanted to take over?
So I guess it gonna depends on what business you have, because in our experience, they needed to be related to construction, be able to get a general construction license. So I guess it depends on what type of business you have. In our case, they had to be able to meet those criterias, and be involved. I mean, you cannot own a construction company and be absent. That just doesn't exist. So they needed to be someone that was ready to be involved. And I will say with that question, it kind of depends on what people is trying to get out of the company they're going to buy. Most of the time, when buyers are looking around, they don't know what they want. So they start by looking, how much do I need to take home? And then from that, they, okay, what's next? Okay, if I need to make this much, now let's find me something that is close by. I don't want to be driving, 4 hours to St. George to manage a business there. So I will say that those are the criteria that kind of help you select the business.
I like that idea of the sell box. In that transaction, we didn't have a formal sell box, but with the majority owners, some of them wanted to stay with the company, right? And continue to grow it. And others want to, hey, we're out. We want cash and we want out, right? And so it was trying to find the right buyer that was going to work with the different members of the owners, which were also a family, which makes things even funner. How many of you have been to a management meeting in the morning and then family counseling in the afternoon?
Yep, we've had that.
But I like that sell box idea because we had to turn down several buyers because they just did not want to work with with people that wanted to continue in the business. And so I like that idea of putting it together, because as you put together your sales deck with what you're going to take out to market, your SIM, right? You should know what you want, right? Or you want to continue, you want out. If you have employees you want taken care of as part of that process. I mean, there can be lots of things that should be in that sell box before you sign on the dotted line. So.
Hold on, I want to go. Sorry, I have to interject one thing. Sure. So on this, I've been involved in multiple transactions. I want to say over 100 now. And I've had this happen more times than I'd like to admit. But we have a majority shareholder that wants to sell, and then there's a minority shareholder. We had one that the guy had two key people, and he had gifted them. They were key people. He wanted to help them out. They were younger kids, and so he gifted them some shares, 5% each. And you got to watch out for those minority shareholders, because the minority shareholders will snag your deal, and they can stop it actually. And he was just pulling his hair out because he's like, oh, I'm trying to help these kids out, and I gave them this, and now they're causing me grief, and it's like, oh man. So when you go to sell, you got to make sure that all of your shareholders are on board if they need to sign and approve that. Right. And you run into that with families, you'll run into it. You have two brothers and the sister doesn't want to sell. Well, even though she's minority, it has to be, in order to sell, you have to have not just a majority, but you have to have all of them sign and say yes. So those are complex things you want to think about ahead of time so they don't kill your deal in the end, or at least slow it down. So I just had to put that in for you from Don. Go ahead.
Thank you. That's a good idea, sell box. We didn't call it that, but we had goals that align with that concept. And the number one goal was, well, what can we get for this company? What can we sell it for realistically? And I'm pleased to say that we were within less than 10% of our goal with the offers that we got. So I think that was partly to do with my mentor, who had a very realistic understanding of the landscape on what we were going to see in terms of deal terms. But in our case, there were just three shareholders, and we were all in alignment over the same goals and all that sort of thing. But I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. Okay. There you go.
Okay, so in the SIBO world, we often talk about team and the value of having specific kinds of skill sets and specialties on your team as you get ready to be ready and as you're stepping into the steps for a transaction, whatever that looks like. So I am curious from each of you, who the key team members were, the roles, and because I am a wealth manager, I am curious about at what point did you engage or start talking with wealth managers to understand actually what do we need to have net after tax after we completed this transition?
I'm going to run myself ragged today. Go ahead, Don.
Well, I have an interesting vignette about that. The year before I ended up selling my company, I went to a YPO wealth management seminar, which maybe some of you have attended or something been part of. The one that I went to happened to be an international group and was in San Francisco. And seated next to me was this guy that I'd never met him before. He was a longtime YPO member. And come to find out, he had a really interesting business. He was CEO of a company called MySpace. And also Internet Gamers Network. And those two companies had more, daily visits than any other websites on earth. So he was sitting there along with me trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? How do we sell? And we listened to a lot of the experts that came to speak to that group. There's about 50 people in the room. And I so regret that I did not follow the advice of one of those advisors, which was simply, once you complete your sale, park it in an ETF. And had I done that, I probably would have saved a lot of trouble, getting through the 2008, 2009 downturn, which really affected me. But I just thought it was interesting that some of you folks have some really good advice to share with these business owners before they sell. The key is how do you get it in front of them, right? But that's one of the things I regret. I just relied on a financial advisor that was referred to me by a friend. And I really, really wish that I had gone with the firm that was presenting at this YPO event. So,
what's an ETF?
Exchange traded funds. They were brand new back then. And his returns, I look back over the years and stuff, especially that was like 5 years later, during the financial meltdown, but they survived really well, did really well. Whereas, companies like Goldman Sachs and others like that lost 30% of their clients' money in a matter of weeks. So,
wow.
Awesome. Let me talk a little bit about putting a team together for an $80 million transaction. And so first we started out, we interviewed probably 5 different law firms. And we actually ended up going with a law firm out of state in the Bay Area that had experience with e-commerce sales and had a big name. So I'll mention Dorsey.
Yeah.
Right. And, their bills were very large. And as an accountant, I had to just shake my head and I was like, I wanted to question everything on their bills. But guess what? At the end of the day, they helped a successful transaction. So we interviewed 5, and that was very painful because 4 of them were local. And we wanted to go with a local firm, but Dorsey out of the Bay Area, they had the expertise we were looking for. Okay. So first legal, second accounting. So I headed up the internal accounting and shoring up the internal. But we also went with a regional CPA firm for audits and tax returns because I'll be honest with you, one of the owners, next door neighbor was doing the tax returns before and didn't even have the CPA behind his name. And so that was one of the things we set up, and we made sure we had 2 years of good tax returns with the good. And we went to a regional CPA firm. We looked at a Big Four, and cost-wise, we didn't think we'd get as much bang for a buck using a Big Four. But we had to get the tax situation set up and make sure that we had good audits for those 2 years. So legal, accounting, and then one other thing, the owner or he was the majority shareholder, started out with the negotiations. And, as an owner, he thought he was everything. He'd started this company 10 years before. He was the smartest one in the group. He was going to be able to talk and negotiate the sale. And you know what? He wasn't the guy to negotiate the sale of his company. And it took a little bit to kind of pry him off of, negotiating. And we hired an outside negotiator to help sell the company. And again, another big fee that as an accountant, I don't like, but really helped the sell. And it really helped separating the owner with all of the thoughts and all the emotions with the sell to, hey, here's the numbers, here's where it's going to go. Let's get this done type of mentality. And so legal, accounting, and then I always make sure you got a professional negotiator that's going to help do a deal for you. And you got to get the owners out of that. The owners can be advisors to it, but shouldn't be part of it. Anyway, that's my 2 bets for the team. I love that. Having the team put together, because when you got the good team put together, guess what? It's going to get you across the finish line, and it's going to get you that big waterfall of money.
Hold on one sec. So back to the team of advisors. So negotiator, those are investment bankers that do those transactions. Typically, correct me if I'm wrong, you're at 25, 30 million and up, right? So if you have a business that you're selling, Howard's business, he had a business broker, right? Business brokers typically do transactions that are 2 million and under, and they do a good job, right? And then you have M&A people that do between 2 million and 25 million in enterprise value. And then for the larger ones, like what Chris was involved in, that's an investment banker. So you want to make sure for business owners out there, for your business owner clients, that you're getting them the right person to help with that negotiation and to run that sales process. Don and I were speaking a couple of days ago, and he's like, Rick, I had 15 offers, but I would have I don't remember exactly what he said. I just killed my own deal if I'd have negotiated or something.
Well, yeah, what I was saying to Rick was we got these LOI offers, and it's overwhelming when you start getting them all at once. And thank goodness that my mentor, who was a professional deal guy, was able to coach me on how to handle every single response to them, and also how to guide me and my team through all of our interactions, both on the phone, in person, and when they came to our for in-person meetings and like that, how to conduct ourselves there. So again, I can't say advisors made all the difference and made a huge difference in terms of the number of millions of dollars that we sold the company for. So it's not a time to go cheap.
Thanks. I love that. The advisory team is a team of people. And I think business owners, entrepreneurs generally feel like they can do a lot, and they can, but they try and take on too much often. Like with Chris, they had, what was it, $9 million worth of the sale. No, an $8 million and a $2 million. So there's $10 million in that sale that the owners left on the table because they didn't hire the right advisors. And I'm sure there's more if we look deeper, right? So I'm sure if you add up all the attorney bills and their investment banking bills, it didn't come to $10 million. But that's what they left. And had they just hired the right people, got the right accounting system. So sorry, go ahead, Howard.
No, I think your comment was great, because that's what I was going to say, that it kind of depends on the size of the deal, is the people that you're going to use. And for smaller transactions, you can use a business broker, and they have in their pool line of people within that frame, that sphere that is gonna help you through the process. And the difference is that most of the work in the smaller deals is fractional. So it depends on how much effort, an attorney or a financial advisor puts in. That's the bill. So I'm not going to scare you like him. You're not gonna pay a couple million to those individuals, because if your deal is not too big, you don't want to pay off too much of that to those individuals. So in the smaller deals, I will say get advice from a business broker, and he's going to know how to guide that transaction.
One other thing before we go, we didn't mention this, but the other member of the team that we're not speaking about, and there's a bunch of you in the room, is the financial advisors. So getting your financial advisor involved early to start looking, where do I put this money? What do I do with it? Because if they don't think about those things ahead of time, they're just going to panic and throw it into the bank in a CD or something, where they make these horrible financial decisions. So getting a financial advisor is paramount to get them, to get you across the finish line and get you where you need to be through that transition. I was speaking to a financial advisor friend of mine in the audience here, Eric, and we were talking about how many times the business owners are just like, they pay the taxes. Like, what's their answer? Well, just pay the tax, right? And well-meaning CPAs will tell them, yeah, just pay the tax. But there's so many other things they can do where they don't have to pay the tax. And I think it's partially up to us to tell them about that. And we're going to have some more meetings about those structures. So, okay, we'll go to the next question.
So some of you sounded like just kind of came out of the blue, and others, planned for it. There's the psychological side of selling a business too. Did you think about, before the sale, did you really think about what the next phase looked like, and or how long did it take you after your post-sale to find your feet again and be ready to do the next thing?
I was given advice from more than one fellow YPOer that said, whatever you think you're going to do, don't do it after the sale. Take a year off. Take a year off from any big decisions. And I thought that was really good advice. I did that for the most part. But then you start to get itchy. I guess that's a good term. You just want to get back into this, into the momentum of things. But taking a year off before you make any really big transaction decisions, I think that was good advice.
I like that, waiting for a year. With this transaction that I was part of, for some of the owners, the sale happened on Monday, and they were in Hawaii on Tuesday. Did not wait, they were gone. The ones that were staying in the business, they wanted to stay in the business, and they continued working, and they worked through the transition, and they loved that part of it. Because it was a strategic acquisition, there was a lot of consolidation and centralization of operations. And so a lot of us in the back office, like accounting and other back office services, were pretty much out of the job by Friday. And so I didn't really get a chance to think or take off a year. I had to look for another gig. But I did like the idea of some of the owners. It was a hard process, 6 months of due diligence. And some of them, they were in Hawaii on Tuesday, and then others were, they loved the company and they were still working. And so, but I like that idea. If you got the big payoff, there's nothing you have to do the next day. Take your time, make sure you've got the right investment advisors. That was another part of the team that wasn't part of the corporate team, but we interviewed a couple of wealth management, and then we let the family members, the business owners, decide. But we also made those available for the other non-family members, but were shareholders in the company. And so I think having a good wealth management advisor before the LOI is signed, those are all team members that you should get into place.
So selling a company, it's kind of like having your first kid again. It doesn't matter how much you try to learn about it, you are not gonna know what's coming. Definitely plan, plan for it is something that you should do. Waiting, it's something that everyone should do, but no waiting at home, waiting for your next move, but planning for what I'm gonna do with my time. If I was spending 60 hours a week in a business, 40, 20, whatever the amount is, what I'm gonna do with my time now. Is it, go playing golf or be with a friend? Great, but plan what are you gonna do now with that time? Because ichi is a very nice word for crazy. So, next week after, the closing, I was at home with this much time in my hands, and I was so happy because all my family wanted is for me to be more time at home. But then a couple of months after, they were like, so when are you gonna find a job? So it's nice to have you here, but it is also time for you to go and do something else. So in my experience, I was kind of going crazy because my whole life, I've been so active and I was doing so much. Being productive is one thing that keeps me alive. And then all of a sudden, you are not doing too much. So a lot of things could happen. And I was okay, but I will say be ready. And even if you're ready, it's going to be different than what you think. Well, so I had to be creative. And, one of the things that I did is I actually joined Transworld. So they helped me with the transaction and I joined them because all the other things that I was planning, they were going to take time and I needed something to do right away. Yeah.
So for the Seamas out there, there's three legs to the stool, right? There's the business, there is your personal finance, and then there's your personal life, right? And you don't do crazy stuff like, unfortunately, I don't know, I read this or heard this somewhere that people that sell a business do one of three things. They buy a really fast car, a really fun plane, or a little 25-year-old girlfriend, all stupid things that you're gonna do. They didn't follow Don's advice to get, wait a year. All right. What do the women do? They find a 25-year-old pool boy. But you see what I mean? They don't know what to do, so they do stupid stuff. So I love that advice. Okay, question. Oh, we've got an online question. Yeah.
So Matthew asked, as someone who wants to acquire a business, how should I differentiate myself from other potential acquirers?
Good question, Matthew.
It is a good question. I think two things. Do your homework in terms of the kind of business that you want to pursue. Do your homework on the business and on the ownership so that you're prepared when you meet or have first contact with them, that you hopefully can build a connection really early in the game, a connection that really is, kind of bolsters trust and confidence that you're someone who they can, rely on to actually perform. I've seen many cases where people show up to try to buy a business or something like that, and they're really not prepared, they're not ready, but they talk a good game. So the second component is listening too. Ask lots of questions clarify, but do your homework too, so you really understand what you're potentially going to buy into.
I would echo that. Lots of research, look at everything about the company. And then if you want to differentiate yourself, okay, lots of people that are selling companies, okay, first thing up is probably how much money's on the table, how much you're gonna pay for it. But there could be lots of other things that are out there, like what's gonna happen with employees, what's gonna happen with the operations. I have a client who had an offer for his company at 7 million, and he had an offer for 5 million. Little company, he was gonna be moved out. One of the companies wanted to consolidate everything to Texas, to Dallas, so basically shut down the operations. And he turned down that higher offer because he wanted his employees to be taken care of.
Wow.
Okay. And so he was willing to do with less money if they were going to keep the operations here in Utah. And so you got to do your research, right? One of the companies did the research and knew that that was a big deal for the owner. And you keep researching. The other way you can differentiate yourself, if you're coming to the table as a buyer, what else are you bringing to the table besides the money, right? Do you have connections? Are you going to be able to help them with more sales? What else are you bringing to the table besides just the payout?
Yeah, I would say that's a big one. A lot of people is trying to exit the business, not necessarily because they are done with managing a business or because of the business was bad, but because they have other dreams, other things that they want to go and pursue. So having a good relationship or seeing that the relationship with the buyer is going to be a good one, it can open up doors for your future. If you have a plan for a future company, or another thing that you're going to do, and you see that this specific person or the buyer is going to be a good fit for you, not only for this transaction, but for future transactions, that could be a good way to know who you're going to sell to.
Thank you. So it's not just a buyer, it's the right buyer that'll pay the right price, right? Chris, I had one like that recently where the seller did take a significant amount in 6 digits less than what the highest buyer was because he felt like they were a better fit. Oftentimes these business owners want someone that's just going to take care of their people, and they're looking for a partner, not just someone that can write a check. Okay, we got 5 more minutes, couple more questions. Yes, Patrick.
So a couple of y'all touched on this a little bit. I want to hear at least one and maybe 2 very specific details regarding hindsight's always 20. What would you have done now? Now knowing what you know now, what would you have done to better prepare for the deal? In other words, what should we all do?
All right.
Yeah, I'm ready for that. So I wrote something actually, and I think time matters. So if you're gonna get your company ready to sell it in 5-10 years, the best time to start getting it ready, guess when it is?
Right now.
But because you did it yesterday, the second best time is today. So time matters. And number 2, financial and structure. So now looking back into the deal, and because I have the way and the opportunity to study my deal, if I were being more careful with my financials, the multiple would have been higher. So my exit, could have been higher as well. So if you have a good structure, if you have people that can do the work, and you have good financials to support the price of that company, so then you're going to be in a lot better shape than if you don't get ready today.
I'll go back to what I started out with, systems. So if I could go back, I would have implemented NetSuite the year before the transaction. That would have made things so much better, so much better. More money for the owners. The other piece that is the kind of the legal due diligence. We were not ready when we started to get through all the legal stuff. And part of that is we didn't have a legal counsel. We didn't have an internal legal counsel. And we had to rely on our outside attorneys, and outside attorneys are very expensive. And so in hindsight, we would have brought in legal counsel, inside legal counsel to handle a lot of the legal stuff that we were trying to do. But systems, getting the financials and everything tight with a good system would have added a lot more value to selling.
What I was saying earlier about a financial advisor personally, I think that was the biggest deal for me. I wish I had had a little higher level, more professional guidance in terms of what to do post-transaction or immediately after the transaction. Because when I look back, especially 5 years later when we went through the whole financial meltdown, I look back and I realized, wow, if it really was the difference between maybe another 3 or 4 meetings or interviews with various financial advisory firms, that would have made a huge difference. And in terms of the actual company transaction, I think we did a really good job of preparing. We like I said, we took 18 months. So there's not a whole lot I would have done there. But, like both these gentlemen said, there's no time like today to start working on your business and get it ready to sell eventually. Because I think, isn't it true? Almost everybody ends up selling a business, right?
Either forced.
Either they have to, but it's better when you want.
That's right. Thank you, Don. Yeah, you're gonna have to sell. And I'm working with a woman right now and had this business, a nice family, and he gets cancer, and 60 days later, she has no husband and she's running this business. And she didn't have time during that 60 days to put everything in order. So yeah. Preparation. That's why we started the chapter. That's why I'm here. Like, hey, we gotta get the word out. So thank you, everyone. We sure appreciate it. Thank you so much to our 3 hosts today. Let's give them a round of applause. So wasn't that amazing? As I listened to those 3 people, Howard, Chris, and Don, who's recently sold their business, there's a few takeaways. First takeaway is one of the things that many business owners face, and that is, you kind of have shell shock of what the fees are, what it's going to cost. In the case with Chris, his business owner left $10 million on the table because 1, they didn't spend the money to update their accounting software. And 2, they didn't take care of business as far as the sales taxes were concerned. So had they done those 2 things, had they hired advisors to help them with that, they could have pocketed $10 million more. I don't know about you, but $10 million is real money to me. So anyway, hire the right people. Know that it's going to cost you some money, but it's not the cost, it's the investment. You're making an investment so that you can exponentially increase your return on that investment. And you do, because none of their advisors cost anywhere, none of them cost a fraction of $10 million. And that's how much they left on the table for the wrong advisors. I found Don Mealing's takeaway interesting when he says about financial advisors. He wished that he would have interviewed 2 or 3 financial advisors. Oftentimes, when you come into a liquidity event, you have a cash windfall. This is more money than you've ever had before. And oftentimes, your advisors that you had initially are not the advisors that you need in the end. Oftentimes, you need a new CPA because they're not used to working. They're used to working in smaller businesses. They're not used to working with clients as with this much money. And so oftentimes it's going to require you to have new people on your team and to fire the old people simply because you're moving into a new territory. You're moving into thresholds that have larger dollar figures on them, and you need more sophisticated advisors for that. I liked Howard when he was talking about planning on what to do next. It's not just the sale, but what are you going to do after the sale? That's the 3rd leg of the 3-legged stool of exit planning. First leg is the business itself. The second leg is your personal finances that we work on, a personal financial plan. But the 3rd leg is your personal life. What are you going to do with your personal life? And I find that's very interesting. That was an interesting perspective from them. The other takeaway I had is the 3 levels of advisory services. Business brokers do transactions typically under $2 million. M&A advisors, mergers and acquisitions advisors, and that's the place that I'm in. We do between 2 million and 30 million in sales price or enterprise value, and then investment bankers do larger. So business broker, M&A advisor, and investment banker. Those are the three tiers. Make sure that the size of your business, you're hiring the right person to do it. And it doesn't hurt to talk to a couple people. Interview one or two. I would interview at least two and talk to them. And that way you have some perspective on who you like and who you want to work with. And also remember that good help costs money, and it is going to cost you to do so. But in the end, it's going to put much more money in your pocket. So good help is an investment. It's an expensive investment, but it exponentially will increase the amount of money in your pocket. So those are the big takeaways. Thanks again for listening. This was a long one. And thanks for tuning in. The good, the bad, and the ugly. M&A, murders and accusations. Let's not kill our deals anymore. Let's make them live. Let's get these across the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you for attending our podcast. We invite you to join us for future episodes of M&A, murders and accusations, the good, the bad, and the ugly of selling your business. You can also visit us at www.bsalesgroup.com or email Rick directly at rick@bsalesgroup.com.